unalienable rights. And among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to establish new government. We therefore, the representatives of the United
Join me on a thought experiment, Newton's cradle, pendulum, and political behavior in a constitutional law society. The premise, hypothesis. A look at the Newton cradle pendulum, and my mind goes directly to that which is political. See, Newton's experiment explains that energy is conserved and momentum is shifted. When you lift one of the metal balls and smash it into the next, there is a shifting of energy and momentum from one ball to another. What really stuck out to me was how the ball in the center was not easily moved, but served as the conduit of that energy. This physics experiment reminded me of my own social thought experiments related to political polarization and the impacts it has on our governing institutions. The hypothesis presented explains that public policy in the United States is shaped by the rugged and dynamic tensions between the naturally reactive democratic passions and the more restrictive institutional and constitutional processes. While this dynamic creates legislative gridlock and slow mechanical movements, it ultimately serves as a preservation for the republic, ensuring that the systematic and tectonic shifts in public policy only come to pass with sustained and unrelenting public support, able to overcome the constitutional friction. The second section is the setup. Sentiment meets institutional realities. The objective of this thought experiment is to observe whether a mixed government republic shows elements similar to the Newton cradle pendulum and is able to successfully absorb the rapid and at times volatile shifts in majoritarian sentiment in society, while also retaining its stable, constitutional, and institutional center that acts as the conduit of that energy. The variables are as follows. Public sentiment is the independent variable. Rate at which public policy change is diluted, enacted, or defeated is the dependent variable, and the constitutional framework itself is the constant variable. Next, the institutional framework consists of the different institutional elements at play, harnessing and conducting the energy as the center ball. In this example, the U.S. House of Representatives, the rule of the many, is the democratic element of our government, instituted by the founding fathers to be closest to the public sentiment. The United States Senate and the United States Supreme Court represent the more aristocratic rule of the few element of our government, and the Senate, with the Senate providing a smaller chamber size with equal representation to each state, no matter population. Finally, the presidency is the monarchical rule of the one element of our society. The founding fathers gave us a government that seeks to check the democratic habits to commit suicide by providing institutional checks that slow the progression of public sentiment. Let's use the SAVE Act as an example. An overwhelming majority of Americans support the requirement to show an ID when voting. Seeing that sentiment, the U.S. House of Representatives drafts a GOP-backed legislation titled the SAVE Act, which passes the chamber with ease. However, the legislation progresses to the U.S. Senate, where it encounters institutional friction of the chamber's aristocratic, anti-majoritarian rules, such as committee bottlenecks, necessity of closure, and the filibuster. These rules bleed the kinetic energy behind the piece of legislation until the momentum is slow. The SAVE Act is stalled in the U.S. Senate, and because of its attempted passage, the Democratic Party becomes concerned about the proposal and seeks to respond. As a result, the Democratic base becomes energized, ready to respond with equal opposing force. Meanwhile, while all of this is occurring, the Republican base is increasingly frustrated and irritated with the lack of immediate results by their leaders. The momentum was with the Republican faction, but that energy immediately struck the middle institutional chambers until that energy shifted to the other side. While the initial attempts may have failed because of the energy conduits and shock absorbers of our institutions, that initial sentiment has forced a shift in public policy driven hopefully to a compromise result. The final section is the conclusion, titled Unlike Newton's Cradle. While Newton's cradle sees the transfer of energy at the start, it loses that energy and ultimately stops near the end. Politics, on the other hand, is an open, dynamic, and ever-shifting environment. Unlike Newton's experiment, our republic moves in the long term, utilizing more a tectonic plate analogy. While the polarization of immediate policy shifts swings back and forth, there is a sustained and massive tectonic shift taking place right underneath, where the demographic, economic, and institutional objects slowly drift with a consistent public sentiment. When the pressure is sustained enough and builds up past the back and forth reactions, you get political earthquakes, such as constitutional amendments or other harder to pass radical changes. This points back to our hypothesis. The day-to-day majoritarian democratic passions are restricted by our dynamic and rugged institutional and constitutional processes, acting as the center, conduit, and shock absorber of that energy, not easily moved. The resulting legislative gridlock forces both parties to ultimately come to the center and compromise, ensuring no one faction can take complete control over the public policy, mandating that the systematic and tectonic shifts in policy only come with sustained public sentiment. This 250th anniversary, our nation's founding should remind every single person of the massive endeavor our founding fathers engaged in. While being astute in the classical education, including in Aristotle's true forms of government, the polity, democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy, the founders sought to create a system of government that included the positive of each form of government and sought to check the eluding dangers of them as well. This is why we have a majoritarian base with aristocratic and monarchical levers, which act as conduits and shock absorbers. We are a republic if you can keep it, declared Benjamin Franklin. We hold individual rights and freedoms to a great esteem, and cherish the rule of law, which guards and protects them. Pure democracy cannot protect such a system in the long run, but a mixed system has the best chance, founded on rule of law. The republic will endure as long as the polity, as long as the democracy is strong but deliberate in its actions, assisted by the shock-absorbing role of institutions, acting as a limit to the violent day-to-day back and forth from becoming a long-term decay.